I'd like to call the March 8th, 2022 Rutherford County School Board work session to order. First order of business is the Pledge of Allegiance, led by Ms. Sheila Bratton.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Ms. Bratton. I'd like to invite everybody to join me in a moment of silence, please. Thank you. Any questions on the approval of the agenda or approval of the consent agenda? Oh, it's a work session, so we won't be taking any motions. But thanks, guys.
We're ready to go.
You're ready. You have no questions? That's a good start. Yeah. Okay. Number 6, Spotlight on Education. We'll do Thursday, Mr.
We will have that on Thursday night, and we look forward to it.
That's a phenomenal program. Wonderful. We have no visitors this evening. Number 8, the presentation, Mr. Reed.
As the board will recall, the board was interested in looking at some outside, maybe county-wide zoning consultants to maybe make some presentations to this board for possible ideas or consideration for maybe engagement by this board to help you in the future to do some county-wide rezoning. We have Mr. Rob Schwartz, who's one of the people that Ms. Johnson and I have spoken with, who seems like a leading potential candidate for that job, should the board decide to go that route. And he's flown in here today from Kansas City, so I'd like to welcome him to Rutherford County and Murfreesboro today. And with that, I'll turn it over to him for his presentation.
Thank you. Thanks, we'll pass them down.
We'll see how this technology goes. It worked before we started the meeting. Here we go.
There it is.
All right, outstanding. My name's Rob Schwartz, and as the introduction said, I'm with RSP & Associates, and I'm the owner of the company. And I think, how much time do I have to talk with you this evening? And then I'll try to pace myself. 30 minutes, all right. So I'll try to pace myself out and allow for questions. And the way I want to work this is if there's some questions as I present, I'm just going to raise your hand or signal something to me, and I'll kind of talk, answer those questions and whatnot. A little bit about RSP. We'll get this to work. All right, great. Founded the company in 2003, and so kind of a funny story is my wife is with me, and when I invite her to go places, usually she's like, no. A lot of the times it's up in North Dakota, but when I said, hey, I'm going to be in Nashville, she definitely came aboard on this. This is a great community. There's a lot of things happening, right? You live here, you're experiencing that. We just finished a project just up the road to the northwest in Clarksville, so with Montgomery County. So very familiar with some of the things that are happening here in the Nashville area. But let me talk a little bit about RSP, because you're new to this. I didn't see anything that's happening where you've used an outside consultant to do things with enrollment projections, redistricting, sites, all of these different things that I'm going to talk to you about here over the next 20 so minutes. Again, I started the company about 20 years ago, and my background is I have an urban planning degree, a master's in urban planning. I've been planning for either counties, cities, the military, or school districts really for almost 30 years. We also on our team have very interesting persons with different disciplines to be able to do the work that we do. We focus on planning and demographics, and so we have GIS, which is Geographic Information Services, or sometimes Geographic Information Systems. These are people that have expertise in mapping and data analytics. And so when I show you some of the visuals of things that we've done, I think we're showcasing a little bit with Clarksville, Montgomery County, so you can see some of the things that we put together. That'll come to light. We also have another group that is facilitators, and they're typically former administrators, usually at the superintendent level, and that's when we get into facilitation. So they know what it's like to be the superintendent, director of schools, and how you have to deal with different things, working with the board, working with the community, definitely working with administration. So that's kind of in general how we capture our company. We also are business partners with ESRI, and they are the leading company when it comes to mapping and those interfaces. We also use survey information with MetroQuest, and so we can do a lot of different things more than what you see with SurveyMonkey. And then we also use Poll Everywhere for some of these things, like tonight, if I wanted to find out, what are you guys thinking about, will baseball start? Will we play in April? You'd be able to respond in that way. We work with districts all through the Midwest. They can be small districts to districts that are 50,000+ students. So whatever the size of district, our philosophy, our methodologies are all the same. It's all driven by data. So our starting point of what we know about your community, and this is really a high-level approach. So we know you're one of the fastest-growing school districts in Tennessee. So that poses some very different challenges of when you can have buildings come online. We know you have some challenges since you're not the financing body. You have to go through the county commission. That adds another layer of how do we put all of this together. One of the values that you get with RSP is when we put our projections together, we typically are 97 to 100% accurate. And that's not just in year one, that's when we get out to year 5. The caveat has been when we get to the pandemic. The pandemic did some very interesting things with enrollments, and from the research that we've done, as we're rolling out of this pandemic, there's a lot of things that we've kind of figured out on where we think enrollment will recover. And I know you saw a huge shift where I think you lost students last year, and then you came back with, I think, 1,800 more students this year. So what does that look like as we move forward? Do we see more of a roller coaster? Is it, what does that look like? The data is going to tell us that. We know that we've heard there's some concerns about changes that happen with your attendance areas, and they may happen on an annual basis. I saw on your website you've changed some things with how students are allowed to be in buildings or transfer between buildings, all the things that we see in growing school districts. And then some of the other things that we heard through some of your board meetings is really just having some data that you can make some decisions and feel confident in making those decisions, whether you're going to the county commission to get funding or you're going out to the community to say, hey, here's when these new buildings are rolling out, here's what that enrollment could look like. So our services that we have, I've categorized here. I'm going to focus the most on enrollment analysis, boundary analysis, and capacity analysis. Those three kind of go hand in hand, because once you have an enrollment analysis, you then determine what's happening in our boundaries, and do we have to make changes, and do we plan for new buildings, and what additions there might be. The capacity analysis is very critical. How are you using your buildings? And we'll talk more about that, but what's the functional capacity? Because that drives our understanding of what's happening in each of these buildings. We know with a university in your community, there's different things that happen in a university town, and so we've done a lot of work in university towns, and I think that comes into play with just some of the nuances of what that means, whether it's a D1 or D2 schools. So again, a little bit about our services. Everything goes back to data. I would not come in here, even with you being a fastest growing school district, and say you're going to continue to grow at a rate that maybe you experienced from last year to this year. There's so many things that are changing, things that may be related to census data. That's when we get to millennials. We know that they're waiting longer to have children. We know they're having fewer children. So how's that going to impact as you look at things like live birth data? We look at live birth data, but we know that's an indicator of what we potentially might see for kindergartners 5 years later. We also know the cost for construction, particularly residential, is about 135% more than it was in August. Gas prices are increasing, right? We have all these things that are going on in our community, and how are they going to impact how much and what type of growth we experience? That's what we have expertise in understanding. Everything that we do in our modeling goes to a sophisticated forecast model. So if you're a statistician, you understand regression. When you look at these general models, we're trying to model the trends and specific things that I would call a subdivision life cycle, things that are tied to the year in which the housing inventory was built, what type of housing it was. Is it single family, multifamily, mobile homes? Whatever that is, it has what we call a subdivision life cycle, where we'll see different type of students at any given point with the age of that particular type of development. So again, it goes back to statistics. We break the districts into smaller areas than census blocks or your existing elementary, middle school, and high school areas. We also know that you have other buildings that can draw enrollment from the entire district. We know there's a lot of different challenges with charter schools and what impact that may have on our enrollment. So we have to understand what's happening down to a smaller level than just census blocks or your existing attendance areas. Some other things that we look at when we get to our projections are shown in this table. So again, this is really small, and that's why I gave you a printout so you can see some of the sophistication that goes into the analysis that you would be receiving. So on the left-hand side, we would identify the buildings and what their capacities are, and we had two different capacities that we were dealing with in Montgomery County. Imagine you may be the same, where we have brick and mortar space, and then we have portable space. And what is our goal? Is our goal to get to the brick and mortar space, or do we have to use these portables? What feeder it's in is the color code with the buildings. As we move to the right, we show you the enrollment different ways based on where a student would reside, based on where they actually attend, and then for past enrollment, a subset of where they resided and actually attended. This gives us a flow of the number of students that would be in the existing attendance areas. So as we change them, because everything's tied back to those planning areas, we get to do some different things with understanding what does that mean with your enrollment. We can get into things that might be socioeconomics. So let's say we want to balance some of the socioeconomics in some of these attendance areas. We can look at things, whether it's the type of developments, some of the census data sets, or even with specifics with your student data that might get into, let's say, special education, English language learners, free and reduced lunch, whatever that might be, that helps us then understand how can we make some of these changes to meet the values that your community has. When we look at developments, we try to isolate and provide some visuals that give you an understanding of where that development is. So again, you as a board can feel confident in how we make some changes, if there needs to be changes to the attendance areas, and does that take into account the growing areas? So do we have a 300-unit single-family subdivision coming online? Is there a 400-unit multifamily apartment complex? How's that going to impact what we see in each of the existing attendance areas? We do a lot with process when we get to the point of understanding that the data is indicating, hey, there's some changes that need to happen so that we can have the right programming in each of these buildings. And so here's the process that we did with Montgomery County. Really the key thing to any of the processes is having as many different entities involved. And sometimes we need to have a more collaborative process where there's more public inputs. We can interject that into that. Sometimes we, here of late, have had a combination of Zoom and in-person meetings. We can do that. We've done things where there's been large committees, small committees. Really, it's what's the best flavor for your community. And so we're just giving you a visual of what that process could look like. Everybody that's involved in the process has a role. We're very good about trying to make sure we establish that right from the onsets. That way, when we get moving through the process, people understand what you are supposed to do and they don't cross over into things maybe that you don't want them to. One primary example that usually comes up in a process is the committee, are they responsible for grandfathering or student options? So we want to be able to address who's going to do that. The foundation to a process comes to the data. And so what's happening with your demographics, what's happening with development, what's happening with enrollment, and then the capacity of schools. And so I said I would get back to capacity of schools. I'm here in a couple of slides. I'm going to kind of dovetail a little bit into that. When we go through a process, we want to set guiding principles. These guiding principles are the sandbox that the committee may work in, or what the community understands the goals are as we move through that process. We also establish boundary criteria, and here's 10 criteria that we typically use, where we can benchmark and have the ability to know how any particular option is competing or correlating with one another. And so then you can make a determination, is one option better than the other based on whatever that particular lens is. I talked about facilitation. We use many different tools to facilitate, and so I've indicated this MetroQuest survey, Poll Everywhere. Really, when we facilitate, we want to hear more from whoever the committee is. It could be the board, could be your community, and there's ways in which we can work with the district to try to get very good public involvements in these particular tools that we have access to. As we move through a process, we're able to document how we got to the end. And so here we're outlining where we were at with Montgomery County, and as we move through their different meetings and how we got to the recommendation that the board approved here about 2 weeks ago, I believe. So again, how did we get there? And there's always questions when you're moving along, making some of these changes, and we tie everything back to those guiding principles, boundary criteria, and the data. So some of the cool things that happen are visuals. And so here's a blown out view of Montgomery County. And in this, if I had a large map up here, you would be able to see the existing boundaries. You'd be able to also have data that shows what the enrollment would be with what was proposed. You'd be able to see things as it relates to the type of developments, the students that are impacted, whatever the variables are that we're trying to focus on in the particular process. All right, I talked a little bit about this capacity. A functional building utilization, how we describe capacity, is important. And you may have something to this level, we hope. Usually there's some nuances to this that we can assist with. So there's the architect capacity, there's a building and code capacity for the buildings, but then there's a way in which you can look at these spaces for how the programs are operating. This becomes important as we've seen expansion of special education or English language learning, and let's say you want specific strands that may relate to buildings and how we can have the right number of students for where programs are. We need to understand what the programming is in those buildings. And so here's some just general definitions as you start to think about capacity and this functional utilization. when we walk through the ability to understand what the capacity is in your buildings, this is kind of a high-level view of how we go about looking at what a capacity could be in these buildings. And this is a district we did that's just north and west of Wichita, Kansas, where we evaluated all of their buildings to determine, again, how many kids can we actually fit in there? Is it 3 sections, 2 sections? And then how do we roll in early childhood? Because they wanted to have early childhood in each of their elementary buildings. I have lots of other definitions that get into how we look at spaces. And this is so important. We used to not do a lot with capacity, but when we entered into redistricting processes, we'd get halfway through and people would start to understand the number of kids we can put in these spaces is different. Maybe we had 800 kids in this space at one point, and now we're saying there's only 550. How come it's that much smaller? How come now we're saying it's only 500? So understanding this functional building capacity is incredibly important. At the end of that process, you start to understand what's happening in each of these buildings as it relates to what we would call either core spaces, from focusing on elementary, or the elective non-core rooms and other program spaces. And how does that then fit into some of the things that may go into deferred maintenance and the ability to maybe do something different with programming in those buildings? We also have some different things that we work through if you're looking for sites. I know you can't read the 2 graphics on the left, even with what I printed. The whole point is that it's a model that we integrate into our mapping software to be able to understand as we look at sites, how do things start to match up with a good decision. I think I heard some conversation about some land that was on 96 Highway and some of the nuances with that land that make it not advantageous for schools. This is those type of things that you integrate in to be able to select, are there better choices for where you select your facilities? And it could be the physical environment, and it could be things where we just know we have to get something in a particular place because we know there's a lot of growth that's happening. The final visual that I'm showing you here is a district just outside of Des Moines, the fastest growing school district in Iowa, and how we were honing in on their next 3 elementary purchases and how we have this LISA suitability, which is our land evaluation site access for understanding where we actually would choose sites. And so the darker green areas were the final choices that we had that we presented to them in their executive session years ago. We also do a lot of work when it comes to a facility master plan. So this is where you tie in all of the things with your evaluation of your buildings, your strategic plan, your enrollment data, and how do you start to map things out to plan for the change that you're anticipating with, in this case, with your district, potential future growth. And so here we just kind of listed off how we're working with this district that's north and west of Wichita, Kansas, how we work through a process to get them to a point of how they'll be able to leverage ESSER dollars and some of their core capital dollars to be able to build the early childhood facility they're hoping to build here in the next 18 months. In that type of process, creating belief statements, and so I've given you an example of how that starts to drive some of the conversations that are important, and how you can start to see with a boundary process, a lot of the things that we talk about in a facility master plan process, they overlap, and so they almost become one and the same. And then my last visual on a facility master plan process was a project that we did in Cedar Rapids, Iowa, that we completed in 16-17, and we're working with some potential updates. And with this district, it was community hubs and how do we reinvest in areas where the buildings were on average 70 to 90 years old. And so we developed some tiers and some processes of how do we go about doing that, and how does that then set the stage for how we have to change boundaries, because we're taking 2 buildings and making 1 building. All right, so this gets me to my last slide as you're on your last page. So, and then I'll open up for some questions that you all may have. Really, this page is just to kind of showcase some of that high level, why RSP is a great choice for your district. These are things that we've heard from many of our clients. And when we get to the point of talking about what services and what we do, we absolutely want you to talk with any of our clients that we're working with over the last 3 to 5 years, even going back 10 years. You can talk to them. That's the value. You can see how data drives decisions. It takes away some of the emotion. It puts it in the aspect of making a good decision, so you're utilizing your dollars more efficiently. So when you go to the county commission to ask for dollars to build buildings, they're going to believe, as what we were hearing in Montgomery County with this new plan, we're more efficiently utilizing the buildings better than what they were before. And so they now are understanding with the growth that's coming, they have to start stepping up to invest in what some of these buildings will be. So we'll see how that plays out over the next couple years. But I want to give you some time to maybe ask some questions, some comments on what I've said, because it's a lot of information, probably different verbiage than you're used to hearing. So definitely ask away.
Anyone have any questions?
I do.
Mr. Young?
A district our size, what kind of time frame are we looking at as far as when the total analysis completed?
Good question. I would say we're probably looking at 6 to 8 weeks. That includes really getting all of the data. We go through a verification process with your student data, and that's a whole sidebar conversation specifically with your administration to make sure how we pull that data that it's going to be accurate. But then also the conversations we'd have with the county, the city persons, some of the prime developers and builders, and then even like touring the district. Some things with the data don't make sense, and you literally just have to drive and you see something, and that gives an understanding of, oh, okay, this is maybe a little bit further along, or maybe this is stalled out. But yeah, 6 to 8 weeks for the enrollment analysis.
Is there a certain time of the year is better to do this analysis than another, or it doesn't matter?
Yeah, definitely. So I would say really there's 2 ways to look at it. From a company perspective, with new clients this size, coming into the spring and summer is advantageous to bring that on where we're not working on existing projects. But we also work within the timelines that you may have. There may be some things you're looking to go out, let's say for a bond referendum, or you're experiencing some pressures in some of your buildings, and so you maybe are looking to do something different. So we try to integrate that in with how that timeline would work. Really the big limitation is when the farther you get from your official count, how close do you want to wait until you get to your next official count to then have this data refresh to understand what some of those changes may be from what it was last year to the upcoming year.
Hi. Could you give us I know you can't give us a definite price range, but from like the least amount of project to the most amount of project, is there some type of price range that you could say?
0 on up. No, so I'm kind of being funny there. So really it would just be as we work through your scope, just so you know, with what we did in Montgomery County, that was just under $100K for the enrollment analysis, the boundary analysis, the facilitation, all the things that we did. And you can look that up. That's public record, but that would be a baseline if that's the type of service you want it with how we laid things out and what I showed you today. That would be pretty typical.
And how long did that project last?
That one we kicked off, it started, I believe, late summer last year as we started working through the data and whatnot, and we just finished it here, I believe, on February 8th. So it was about, in total, about 6 months.
Thank you.
Any other questions? You mentioned a committee or I think you mentioned a committee. So would there be a need to establish a community committee, or can you elaborate on that, or did I mishear you?
No, that's exactly. So when we get to the point, the data says something needs to change, we can work in many different venues. One would be a committee. So you form a committee that the focus is on boundaries. I would highly recommend, if you don't have a standing committee that would just annually look at boundaries, where you get an update, here's the enrollment, and they make some decisions. Hey, do we need to maybe look at something differently? And we set up some priorities of like what the board may think with the input of administration on how we go about making some of those changes. That would be very beneficial, having a committee like that. That way, when you take something out to the public, they're used to knowing, hey, there's a committee, they've looked at this, here's some of the guiding principles, the criteria that we look at, and here's how we're going to go about making some of those changes, and here's what those changes might look like, and getting their input. Because again, every process, even in Montgomery County, the process changes over time on what the boundaries look like. It may be through physically it's different, or it could be things that we ended up doing in Montgomery County of how it was phased in, because we focused on more of the social, mental well-being of students, knowing that, hey, we've gone through all of these changes. Is there a way, we know we need kids to move into our new buildings that are opening. We have buildings that are too full. How do we start to move them in a way that's maybe a little bit nicer with some of the impacts that families have had over the last 2 years?
Thank you. Any other, Ms. Bratton?
Refresh my memory. How many students does Clarksville? I know they're not as big as we are. Clarksville.
No, I think they're about 42,000.
Okay.
Okay. No other questions? All right. We thank you for being here and appreciate the information you provided.
Perfect. And as far as timeline of when you all will or will not make a decision, how does that fit in? Just
It's a great question. We'll digest this information. We are working with our county commission on a building plan, so I suspect in the next couple of weeks we'll move on something.
all right. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Appreciate your time this evening. All right, Mr. Spurlock, number nine.
Biometrics component, electronic timekeeping. Any comments from Doug or the board?
I'm glad to see this.
I would like to add to this motion.
Okay.
Hold on your mic, Ms. Bratton.
What's the problem? I would like to add, is it called an addendum? I can't remember. To the motion, is that what it's called?
We're not voting on it, so I guess we
So,
could
just
modify it.
okay. That any money that has been spent on these systems by the school needs to be reimbursed by the county, and if there's any ongoing expenses, such as signing up for years to come or whatever, needs to be absorbed by the county and not the school.
Mr. Bodary, can I ask a question to that point? Did we enter into any kind of contractual agreement with the company that's providing this software?
We have a maintenance agreement that was approved by the board, and those are the, and just for my clarification for this budget coming up, we have lease payments for copiers, some copiers down in the schools that they use their ADM funds for. That's it's a small ongoing amount for the time clocks for the maintenance agreement, just in case there's an issue with it. I'd place that in there at the school level, just like the copier leases. Are you saying you want that out?
I do.
Okay. All right.
I want us to take care of all this, okay? Okay? Okay.
Any other questions? Members of the board?
Can they still clock in with a telephone or a computer?
They will be able to. Right?
We have quite a substantial amount of exceptions and overrides that we've seen with the computers, the desktop computers, and the cell phones. So the push would be to try to go to just using the time clock, not a biometric, but just with a keypad for all the hourly.
Would it be a code?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Oh, no, just like, I just.
There's no way we can use our badges? Or they can use their badge? I don't know. I'm just throwing this
Well,
out.
that's a good question. The badge system that we've invested in years ago when we were looking at this initially, that was a thought, but we had already invested some funds in the Raptor system.
Oh, okay.
That system did not network with.
Jive, okay, okay.
Oh, I would think initially when this system was set up, there's going to be a higher rate of overrides and things like that until everybody absolutely gets used to using the system.
I think that's what, when you see other systems, they saw the same thing. That's why they went to the actual time clock, because of the overrides. And like I said, this is not new anymore as far as we've had it for, we implemented this going at the beginning of July, and then as they came back. So, I mean, it's we've just seen a constant need for substantial amount of overrides in the schools without the time clocks present.
So for clarification purposes, we are keeping electronic timekeeping. We are just eliminating the biometrics component of electronic timekeeping.
If that's the will of the board, then what I'll do is, I've already talked with Steve Solomon, and of course, with the will of the board, we'll, after what you told me last time, all the new ones being installed, we froze the scan. And now what we'll do is we'll go back. And the good news is like I told several of you before, that the clocks that have the biometric scan on it, and I say biometric, it's a fingerprint scan. And those same clocks have a keypad, so IT can switch it right over. We're not out any money.
Okay.
I've also had purchasing reach out to the vendor to see if we could just trade the ones with scan in for just keypads, which is a little bit less, and they give us credit for it. And they're checking with their corporate folks to see.
We appreciate that
Very good.
very,
Thank you.
very much. Thank you,
That way
Mr. Votary.
That's not even there.
Sounds like to me you're on top of it. We appreciate it.
Whatever the board wishes, that's on them.
Thank you.
Follow through.
We wish this.
We want to keep our employees.
Any other questions, comments on this item? All right, next item.
All right, number 10, the Tennessee Investment Student Achievement. I do want to let you know that it's a long way from being approved. There are some good things I think we would all agree in here, and we all want to make sure that it is a student-funded formula, because that's what it's all about. So if we could go to that next slide. As you can see, the historical funding of reform that's taken place, in 1992 was when they actually created the BEP, and it was created, quite frankly, due to a lawsuit about some of the rural systems. And in 2007, I think there was a little bump there in terms of putting more into some of those 70-something points within the BEP. 2014, Governor Haslam had the task force to go in and look at it. They didn't do a whole lot with it. 2016, they did once again go in and tweak some with the data points, and which leads us to today. One of the things that Governor Lee wants to do is invest in our students to close some achievement gaps that's taking place, and we would all be naive to say that it's not occurring. Now, once again, when we look at what's projected for us, this was taking on a 5-year average, eliminating the COVID years, and giving us a ballpark figure. And I think everyone knows that. They project, looking at what we would propose to have during that time, I think they project our student enrollment at 49,729.45. We'll be over 50,000 next year, easily. One of the things, I'll go back to the presentation we just saw. One of the things I would have asked him, it was migration. Have we taken into consideration of people moving in from out of state? Because I think we'd be naive to think that a lot of people are having babies here and so forth and so on. I think he even made that statement. So looking at migration, that can be found very easily at our Chamber of Commerce. Looking on the second page, before we go to this, you can just leave that right there. Look on that second page of our release, and this kind of gives you an idea of what we're looking at here. The first part of the funding formula is called a base. If you can go to that.
There's some technical difficulties.
Technical difficulty. The first part of it is called the base. Just to give you a little historical thing, what we're looking at here in terms of the base. The base is a 70-30 split between the state and the local. And we'll talk a little bit about that once we get this picture up here. Hopefully, John will have it here for too long.
No pressure.
No pressure, John. But when we're talking about the base there, and we're talking about the I think that is that you did have it, John, up there. Yeah. There we go. Now, if you just kind of scroll over, we get to talk about the base a little bit. Keep on moving. All right, we can bypass some of this. We all know who was on the subcommittees and stuff. Let's go down to the. There we go. Well, let's stop right there. As you can see, this overall funding landscape, they anticipate $9 billion in total education funding for 2024, and that's state and local. It's for the entire state. For fiscal year 24, $1 billion of new recurring state funds, and for this upcoming fiscal year, $750 million in one-time state funds. 23. Move on. Next, biggest takeaways from this is districts will receive more funding under TISA. Now, that's not exactly the truth. Some of your rural ones, in fact, I was on an online call with all the superintendents of Tennessee, and there was a gentleman there, and I cannot remember what system it was, but he had like 2 schools. Now, they were getting the feel of what superintendents felt like, and he stated, even though I will lose a little bit of money, I'm for the funding formula. Now, he was kind of an outsider there. Not a lot of the rural agreed with that. So, basically, we would get additional funding. Local, the total contribution, what they're looking at, and quite frankly, it won't impact us. What they're looking at is ramping it up over 4 years, and on the 5th year, then the maintenance of effort by the local governing body would have to match the state, according to their MOE. Keep in mind, every year we grow. And I think the gentleman just did the presentation. We don't expect to lose kids. Every year we grow, that growth in turn makes raise our maintenance of effort. So this is not unique to us. We're not contracting, we're not losing kids. All right, move on to the next. Let's talk a little bit about the base. First of all, let's talk about the entire funding formula. It starts with a base, all right? The base is every amount of funding that we get from the state and the local, and also grant money. You know what I'm talking about, coordinated health, that's one of the safe schools. Everything that you can think of that we get grant money that comes in and goes into our 141, that's what the base would be considered. Now, in what they're proposing for a state is $6,860 for every student in the base. If this came to fruition, we would be the 15th highest base amount in the country. So that's the base. Now, what's in the base? Let's move on a little bit. Move on a little bit more. All right, back to the base again. What's in the base? As you can see, the base includes everything that you would think it include. Teacher salaries, nurses, counselors, principals, RTI, technology, you name it, it's in the base. Okay, so every student starts out with the same amount of money, $6,860. Now we go to, from the base, we go to the multipliers. And I'll refer you back to our district allocation that's projected on page 2 of this form here. I'll refer you back to that. We see, first of all, economically disadvantaged. Does everyone see that on your paper? Look at the weight. 25%. Look at the projected number of students that they say we have currently in our system or will have in our system, 9,817.02. And look at the amount of funding. Then you have, within the weights, concentrated poverty. And you ask, what's the difference? Well, economic disadvantages are direct certified, either through SNAP, TANF, and things of that nature. The next one, concentrated poverty, is quite frankly what that is a location in which the children reside, which is below the poverty line. Now, keep in mind, and this was one thing that kind of struck me a little bit, with economically disadvantaged comes a lot of paperwork that we have to do. You know, and quite frankly, they get, those students that are economically disadvantaged, they get, free and reduced lunch, free lunch, things of that nature and other different things. If you're in an area in which it's a concentrated poverty, you could actually have an entire school, even those without, that would qualify for free and reduced lunch, actually eat free. And it would be subsidized by the government. And you wouldn't have to fill out those forms. You know, that's one of our biggest challenges that we've had over the years, and I think Mr. Beaudry will tell you that too, and anyone that worked here, is a lot of times when a kid fills out that form and qualifies for it, as they go up maybe to high school, they don't fill them out. And then, of course, we end up with that debt that we see sometimes, and we haven't done it in the last few years because it's been taken care of. Now, that's not the only thing is in the weights. Charter is in the weights. I think you all guys heard that last week about what charter, 5%. Now, when I'm throwing out these percentages, that's 5% of the base, which is $6,860. All right, next is unique learning needs. Now, what are unique learning needs? And you'll notice as we go down on that form that gives us our approximate amount, you'll notice that it gets incrementally higher. We start off at 15% and go down to 150%. Now, what would that look like? Well, that could be, for example, ESL. It could be students with disabilities. It could be 504 even, and a lot of other things that fall under that. And we'll look at a little example of that in a few minutes here. Go to the next slide. All right. The next part is called direct funding. All right, that's the next part, direct funding. If you'll look on our page, what does that kind of look like? K-3 literacy, 4th grade tutoring, CTE, and post-secondary assessment. You'll notice that's a grand total of what they project of $812,428.15. So that's our direct funding right there. Go to the next one. The last part, let's go to skip over that, go back to that. Okay, let's see if we've got the outcomes on there. Do we have outcomes on there, on that? Okay, let's go to that one. Go to that next screen. This is a good one here. You need to look at this one. This just shows you how a student can be, how it can be different. Differentiation according to needs. The first one there is an example of elementary student. The base is 6,860. When you go down there to unique learning need, you get a 20% of the base. And because they're in the K through 3 grade student, it's $500 total funding for that particular student, no matter where they go, $8,732. Now, compare that to the next one to the right, student 2. You see the base is the same. However, economically disadvantaged, check. Concentration in poverty, check. Sparse and small. What you were talking about there, sparse is when they live in a community where their school is a long way from where they live. Yes, they get funding for that. And small is those systems where there are not a lot of students. For example, we're talking about K-3. It's funded 1 to 20. They may have 15 or 12 kids, but guess what? They still need a teacher. Therefore, they get that extra bump in that base of 5%. Unique learning needs, this individual right here has a 60% and he has two checks here, a 60 and a 20. And then last but not least, fourth grade tutoring, look at the total funding and compare the two. So this is $15,592 is compared to $8,732. Let me tell you why that exists. We have achievement gaps. These students need that additional funding. And as this is given to us, as this is allocated to us, not given to us, it is to our detriment to not use this money for that student. If not, we will have a reckoning. We will be held accountable. But right now, we've all heard it before. How can we make a difference in every student's life? Let's fund us more. But not every student is the same. So that's how we get that difference there. You'll go to the next one.
Mr. Spurlock, may I interrupt you
Yes,
for 1 second?
absolutely.
But back to that accountability component. Is there currently, or is there going to be, are you aware of what that accountability looks like? I like the idea of it not going into a big pot. How are we going to ensure that money goes to that child?
Right. There will be some accountability. Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. And when that student was to leave in the middle of the year, that funding will go, whatever's left from that funding period will go with them. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so will we be making adjustments then to our fund, the way we do our finances to ensure?
We would.
Okay.
Now, there will be some flexibility, but right now they're fleshing that out so that we can determine. There has to be some kind of flexibility due to the fact that it's a moving target a lot. Yes. So there will be some, flexibility, but not to the detriment of that child.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes. All right, middle school, I'm not going to bore you with that, but it's the same thing. That's our district. That was an example of district overview there. All right, here's something kind of interesting. Now, they do have a stipend for fast-growing student districts. It says here, LEAs with the current year growth above 2% from the prior year will receive same year funding for additional students. So we'll get additional funding there. This was one I think Mr. Torres talked about, that there was a caveat on this next one, fastest growing infrastructure stipend. If you'll recall, what did he say about that? If it's basically, in a nutshell, if it's available. Keep in mind some of these things that are outside of this funding formula, if the budget, was to change, they would take some of these outside away. Getting back to our MOE as a county. Now, you saw that on the form of projection of our allocation. Our county funds over 600 positions outside of the BOE. They do a great job. And we need them. We need those positions. There's no waste, but we're very thankful that our funding body has provided for us.
So can I ask a question?
Yes.
Maintenance of effort, what you're just talking about, and it's something that concerns me greatly. You said earlier that it won't affect us because of our growth. So we grow at a rate that we will maintain the funding. That's what you're saying? Yes,
ma'am. It already occurs. Our maintenance of effort goes up every time we grow. Our maintenance of effort goes up. What they're doing keep in mind, there's about 12 school districts in the state of Tennessee that are actually growing. The rest of them are either staying the same or contracting. Excuse me.
Thank you.
Last thing I will say is looking at this investment coming up. It talks about $125 million supporting our teachers. I think the one that grabs my attention is the last paragraph there. It says, increase in the state minimum salary by $10,000 from $35,000 to $45,000 by 2026. And that's pretty good now, because once again, our contribution, we're not like a lot of the rural counties. We're already doing that, but we will see an increase in salaries as we go along. If there's anything else there. All right, let's go on. Okay, this kind of goes where this has to go. We all know that. If it's, you know, and quite frankly, the second paragraph, that fiscal capacity will be established by CBER, evaluated by the comptroller of the Treasury, and approved by the State Board each year. Now, we got conflicting news on that. That says CBER. We can all read that, right? CBER Fox. Then the commissioner said TASER. And I'm not mistaken, we use TASER now, is that correct? Or a combination of both? Combination of both? If we had our druthers, I don't know if that's a word, but anyway, if we had our choice, TASER right now is what we would want to, what the county would want to go to. All right, once again, improving transparency and accountability, all this stuff, basically, quite frankly, it will be all fleshed out if we go to this. There will be a lot of, you know, I can see some challenges like mobility. You know, we do have some schools that have mobility and move around. Yes, if a student was in a charter school and they decided to come back, that would be some changes there. I think there's nothing, one of the things I think you've got to be very excited about with this one, because we are a faster growing district, is as the kids come in, so does the money. It doesn't lag behind. Any questions?
I've got one. So this is above and beyond what we might get for Title I.
Yes.
So we're going to get this, something like it, plus
Yes.
Title I funding.
Right. That, you know, if you look at that first, if you look at the first page there when they give us what our increase was, I think it breaks down, and Mr. Boulder, you can correct me, I think she's told us 15% increase. Yeah. You know, when they were going over this, it was like a 15% increase. Any other questions?
A lot of information. Appreciate that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions by members of the board?
How does that compare to what we got this year
Better.
or last year?
It's much better. It's much better.
Good?
We've got somewhere around 4. Well, we got 2 point something, but we got 4 coming, 4 million in growth, a little over 4 million. Yeah, 4.7. We'll get our last payment hopefully by what, June? Now, we didn't get it until, I think we got it about a month late this time, our first part of it. So it's a transition. Any other questions?
I think we're good. Thank you.
All right, thank you. All right, number 11, Booster Club guidelines.
So members of the board, you have before you the policy on school support organizations and a list of existing booster clubs, 501c3s, and maybe a couple that are not. I was hoping maybe Ms. Ridley could go over the policy and help us understand a little more clearly. There was some information I had heard from parents who had desired to establish booster clubs at their schools. Their administrators told them that this board had acted years back to maybe limit that. So this really is for information and clarification, as we do have several parents at several different schools desiring to establish a 501c3 booster club. So Ms. Ridley, maybe if you can help walk us through where we are and what the procedures are currently for booster clubs, or maybe Mr. Bodery can help with that.
So right now, our policy that covers our school support organizations, as the chairwoman mentioned, is policy 2.404. And I believe you all have a copy there in front of you. But basically, it states that in order for a school to have a booster club or a parent support organization, there are these procedures that have to be followed. And so there has to be an agreement between the board and a school support organization that has to be in writing, and then there's some minimum things that the agreement has to have, some minimum provisions. The agreement has to state that the organization will abide by any policies and procedures, and then an agreement that the board will be indemnified in addition with the director of schools and other agents for the actions that the SSO does. Prior to entering the agreement, the SSO, School Support Organization, has to submit the following information to the director of schools or his designee, her or his designee, excuse me. Documentation that they are a written statement of the goals and objectives that the group is seeking, the principal's contact and telephone number, as well as the address and position officer of the group, and a copy of the school support organization's written policy. And that's mostly for things like accounting, money, materials, property, security, services, and other things of value. Of course, they have to follow all applicable federal, state, and local laws. They have to maintain a copy of its charter, minutes, bylaws, everything that a 501c3 organization would have to do. In addition to the procedures that are set forth in this policy, there's also an agreement that they have to sign. And I believe that agreement is on our website, on the RCS website, under the accounting. And that agreement also states that they have to contract with an independent CPA to perform the agreed upon procedures that I just mentioned every year. And they have to report on these procedures within 90 days after the end of their fiscal year. Now, that list that you have in front of you, those are the ones right now that are 501c3s, and those are not only booster, but also there's some PTOs in there that are mentioned. They have different fiscal years, so they don't all follow the same one, but they do have to report based on the CPA's audit that they have to do every year.
Do we need to clarify in policy things like who do they report to? Do we need to lay out more clearly for booster clubs a timeline for them to report? We know that the financial accountability is a reason why there has been limitations in the past, and we want to make sure that everybody's operating on a high level of integrity. So do we need to send this policy to the policy committee for cleanup language and clear guidelines?
Yes, we can add it to there. I think the next one will be sometime in early or mid-May, April.
Okay. Thank you. So our policy currently allows for these. So if an organization follows these procedures, then there should be no reason why a booster club with these accountability components couldn't be established.
That's my understanding, correct.
Okay.
Johnson.
So, yes.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I have a question. Number 4, this is different from what it has been. Previously, it has been they can either use a CPA or they can run it through the central office. For some of these booster clubs, if they're cheerleaders, they may have one fundraiser a year and they raise $500. It's very expensive to have a CPA. And this, I mean, we're already excluding a lot of people from some of these booster clubs. And my fear is this is going to exclude them even further. They have to hire a CPA because it's very expensive.
This is only if they establish a 501c3 booster club. Now, Mr. Bodery, we had a conversation where school clubs could establish a club and run their funding through the school. Isn't that correct?
Before me, and some of you may have been on the board, when all the comprehensive high schools received a second bookkeeper with the thought of, okay, we need to have staffing, if we could, to take care of the booster clubs and the other school support organizations, if they'd like to come in-house with their books and avoid the cost of, and it's not an audit what they're required. The board had the agreed upon procedures. It's a lot lower review than an audit. A full-blown audit would cost substantially more, but I understand what you're saying, Ms. Sharp, is it's still a cost. So previous board said, if you don't want that cost, if you also don't want the hassle of having a volunteer treasurer keep track of your books, then the previous board funded that second bookkeeper position for the high schools to allow that option for our SSOs. Some took advantage of it, some did not.
So essentially, we have two different options here for our parent organizations. They can establish a club, and their accountability looks different, but they've run their money through the schools. Or a booster club can be established with a 501c3, and then they adhere to the CPA guidelines, which has a cost that comes with it, but there is that choice there.
And we actually had it before the board. John, could you please, and I'll show you if you folks would like, if you'll pull up our website, the RCS website, and go underneath the departments to budget and finance. I'd like y'all to see this, because that's one thing we've been trying to work with the SSOs to make it easier for them to find the information to help them stay in compliance with the board policies and state statute. John, if you'll go down on the right there to this, it says School Support Organization and then Booster Club. What we've got right here, and just, if you will, John, please scroll down a little bit. What we have right here for our booster clubs and SSOs is we have created this web page, which is basically a one-stop shop for our booster clubs and other SSOs, that all the required training they can do right there online. Also, all the forms, the guidance with the forms and agreements, and the policies and procedures pertaining to them is right there in one location for all of our SSOs. We created that this current school year to try to make it simpler for them.
Wonderful. Appreciate the information.
With the compliance.
Another, one more question. Mr. Bodery, is there a difference between the boosters and then the clubs and the boosters as far as the amount of money that goes to these?
It just depends on the legal structure of how they're set up. Some are incorporated separately, some are not. With the club, we have a lot of clubs that, that would fall with their financials underneath our internal school funds, which are audited in-house with our contract CPA. Matlock and Clements is who the board is engaged with currently. So it's a different legal setup.
I know we've had several conversations about this. As a former banker, we do need to put those protections and things in there for our system and for the parents and everything that are in this. But we've got to find a way to let some of these boosters who just raise $400 or $500 a year, they have one fundraiser where they don't have to go through a CPA, because it's over $1,000 just for an audit. So I'm very concerned about the North End. Our North End hasn't been able to have a booster club in a long time.
If you'd like, Ms. Sharp, we would be happy to reach out to the boosters, again, just to remind them that there is always, for those small, and I understand the larger ones are like we're separate, but for the ones that you gave example right there, they are always welcome to bring their finances, especially with that small operation, in-house. Yeah. That's why the board appropriated funds for that second bookkeeper at each high school, and be happy to work with them on that, so they would be relieved of that expense.
Thank you, I appreciate that.
I was thinking when we put this in play that a majority of them came in-house when we gave them that option. So
yeah, had several.
I haven't known of an issue until now. But I was working pretty good, but obviously there's some people who didn't know about it. So now hopefully we'll clear that up and we're getting that communicated.
Yeah, I think there was some confusion, largely with the bigger projects that some of these schools are wanting to do, these athletic programs, and even bands for that matter. So there was some confusion, but I do appreciate the clarification, and the policy certainly helps. So I hope this is an improvement for our families. Any other questions? Okay, next item, Mr. Spurlock.
Our number 12, naming of the Smyrna High School football field, found on tab 3. Smyrna High School is requesting that a football field at Smyrna High School's Robert L. Rake Stadium be named after Smyrna Ready Mix. The facility would be called Smyrna Ready Mix Field at Robert L. Rake Stadium.
Any questions, comments? No? Okay.
Our number 13 are 2022-2023 special course requests found on tab 3. Instruction Department is requesting permission to make application to offer credit for special courses under the following guidelines. Rule 0520-1-3-052A. Local school systems may offer special courses not listed in the following up above on an experimental basis. The Commissioner of Education must approve each course in advance each year. Rutherford County High Schools are requesting approval for the following special course requests. This is Life Skills Management. It will be a second option for health at LHS. It teaches developing a positive image, improving well-being, goal setting, time management, conflict resolution, all the things you would like to know about and was afraid to ask.
What would be the requirements to teach this course?
We were health or PE.
Be health or PE?
Right.
Okay.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay, next item.
All right, the next item is legal, found on tab 4, disciplinary hearing appeal. Number 1, the board has been requested to review the decision of the DHA to uphold remandment of a student from Stewart's Creek High School. Based on the review of the DHA's record, the board may do the following. A, affirm the decision of the DHA. B, overturn the decision of the DHA. Or C, grant a hearing before the board.
Members of the board, you have a folder in front of you. These have also been emailed to you. Ms. Ridley asked that the folder remain, but if you have any questions, you can get with Ms. Ridley after the meeting. Next item, Mr. Schwartz.
All right, it's number 2. The board has been requested to review a decision of disciplinary hearing authority to uphold the remandment of a student from Smyrna High School. Based on the review of the DHA's record, the board may do the following. A, affirm the decision of the DHA. B, overturn the decision of the DHA. Or C, grant a hearing before the board.
Thank you. Same applies to that item. If you have any questions, please meet with Ms. Ridley. Next item.
All right, number 15, financial matters found on tab 5. Number 1 is Stewart's Creek High School Football Booster Club turf project requests. The Red Hawk Football Booster Club Incorporated is asking for permission from the Rutherford County School Board to install artificial turf on Stewart's Creek High School football field. This project will be 100% funded by the Booster Club and an unsecured loan that will be payable by the Booster Club. Total project cost is estimated at $790,000. The attached document detailing the project has been reviewed by the Assistant Superintendent of Budget and Finance for financial compliance, as well as the Rutherford County Staff Attorney and Rutherford County Athletics Director for legal compliance over Title IX. Contingent of the school board approval, the turf purchase will be made through Rutherford County Schools Purchasing Department, and upon completion of the project, Rutherford County School Engineering will inspect the construction to ensure that it complies with bid specifications. It is stressed that the turf project becomes donated asset from the Booster Club to Rutherford County Schools, and at that time of the donation, there will be no liens on the donated property / construction as verified by the Rutherford County School Board Attorney.
Thank you. Questions, comments?
I do have one question. It's
Ms. Maxwell, you
I've
put the
been-
mic down.
sorry, I'm sorry. I have been asked before, and I forgot to inquire. This is kind of like the way we're going. All our sports fields are probably all going to be turf at some point. When one of the reasons that they want to have turf fields also is the fact that they want to have competitions there. They want to be able to raise money. Somebody asked me, and I didn't know, do they have to give 20% back to the school? They do not.
No, ma'am.
Okay, so that was a rumor that was out there, and I was asked, and I did not know. Okay.
We've had quite a bit of schools, several of them. I wonder what the price was for the last turf field. What's that increase in cost, I wonder?
It's up, I think. Do you know what? I think it was it
They're all pretty close. It depends on where they are and whether they can leave the material on site. They're all in that 700 to 800,000. It's what they have been.
Has it
But material prices have jumped about 20% since then. So if it was 7, it'd probably be 8 something now. I'd say $1 million or less for a football field.
And how long does this turf last? And if it needs to be repaired or replaced, is that on RCS or is that on the Booster Club and the program?
The way we've done it so far, it's 7 to 8 years. It is the period they expect, and it's on the school to replace it.
I don't want to interrupt you, but I think that's a little bit longer than that. Okay, I think it's more probably about 10 to 15 years, somewhere in that neighborhood. Yeah.
And are all the schools going through our purchasing department now? Is it helping them? Because if they were to go out of house to try to purchase this, it would be very expensive.
This was with previous projects, like you said, Ms. Maxwell, we're following basically the same format. And the reason we're going through house like that with purchasing is, yes, that's a donated asset and that they're raising the money, but at the end of the day, it becomes a donated asset, which then, has to be maintained. And we just want to make sure that what everybody wants, including the booster, that's what is built. So that's why it's going.
Oh, no, I totally agree, and I think it's great that they're doing this. I also think you get a little better price when you go with the school system than you do
I would agree with you. I would agree with you, ma'am.
Thank you.
One of the things I will say, what this does, it gives the girls soccer team a chance to play on a lighted field. It gives the boys soccer team to play on a lighted field, and on a grass field, it's not unheard of spending $20-something thousand to maintain it in 1 year, and sometimes more than that.
How many of our high schools still have grass on their fields currently?
We currently have 2.
Well, we still got Stewart's Creek. They're going to have it done, okay?
Stewart's Creek,
Laverne, Eagleville,
Siegel,
and Siegel.
Eagleville, and Rockville.
And Riverdale.
So we got a few.
So we currently have Oakland,
Blackman
are the 2 that we have, and we're fixing to get 2 more.
I personally, I can see it from both sides. I appreciate the turf field. We have a hard time with deferred maintenance already. So I have deep concerns about this being like air conditioning, and I don't even mean to equate it because I know they're in different categories here. But when this bill comes due for replacement for the system, that is of great concern to me. If it's the same cost as installation at $790,000. So I don't know if we need to address who should be responsible. I mean, I appreciate the booster clubs putting it in, but I'm not so sure that we shouldn't look at maybe a shared cost with the clubs that use it and the booster clubs. And if we plan for that in advance, the impact on the taxpayers as we battle growth and deferred maintenance at the balloon that it is and buildings. I know that's probably an unpopular statement with a bunch of booster clubs right now, but I don't think that's fair to put that on. It is an option. It isn't a requirement to education. So I do have concerns about that cost. Members of the board, do you have any other questions or comments? No? Okay. Next item, Mr. Sparrow.
All right, next one is number 2, Capital Project Fund Budget Amendment for Smyrna High School Football Turf Project. Smyrna High School is asking for permission for the Rutherford County School Board to install artificial turf on the Smyrna High School football field. This project will be funded 100% by donations and will be budgeted and accounted for in the County Educational Capital Projects Fund, as Smyrna High School does not have a legally separate football booster club. Total project cost is estimated at $900,000. The attached document detailing the project has been reviewed by the Assistant Superintendent in Budget and Finance for financial compliance, as well as the Rutherford County Staff Attorney and the Rutherford County Athletics Director for legal and Title IX compliance. Contingent on the school board approval, the turf purchase will be made through RCS Purchasing Department. And upon completion of the project, Rutherford County Rutherford County Schools Engineering will inspect the construction to ensure that it complies with the bid specifications. It's stressed that the turf project becomes a donated asset to Rutherford County Schools, and at the time of the donation, there will be no liens on the donated property / construction as verified by the Rutherford County School Board Attorney.
Thank you. So this is going to be funded a little differently because they don't have a booster club. Is that 100% funded by Smyrna Ready Mix? That's wonderful. What a wonderful donation.
The, Mr. Lee, what's the variations there in terms, is it the turf itself, the quality, or?
It's basically the same turf. One school's hauling away their material. Smyrna's going to use their topsoil on their practice field. So you're going to save some money there. We have an estimated budget from a couple of contracts, and Doug and I discussed it, and we decided to go a little bit higher with the budget, seeing how it's a one-time donation until we got the bids in. So expect them to probably come in a little less, but that was because they did not have hard numbers, they were just estimates. We went with that so that it would protect the school and protect us.
Thank you for that clarification. Any questions, comments? Next item, Mr. Spurlock.
All right, next item, number 16-1, Blackman Middle School Auditorium Light Request. Principal Amy Confey Marlin is requested to upgrade a portion of the auditorium light system. Engineering construction is reviewed the request and approved. This request is no cost to the board. It's a $9,000 donation from industry partner.
Nice donation. Thank you. Any questions?
Very thankful.
Next item.
All right, number 2, 5-year building program. On Tuesday, February the 22nd of 2022, the 5-year building program was approved by the Health and Education Committee in concept. Funding for the design was also approved. The committee requested to the board to prioritize the first 2 years over a 3-year period and come back before them with their request. Full county commission approval is required. We're requesting the board discussion and guidance for moving forward. Mr. Lee?
Basically, just the 5-year plan that we presented to the county commission. They liked the idea and concept, approved the funding for the design, and requested that you guys give them a priority list. So we're looking for that list that we can take back to them to get funding to move forward.
Comments, questions, conversation on the 5-year building plan?
Well, I thought the presentation went really, really well. And I left out there, out of there, very pleased that it could have gone as well as it could have. And I understand, and I like the way they phrased it. We want the whole apple, but we're not sure we can get it all in one bite. And that made sense. So we need to decide as a board, I want to do this, and I'm committed to all 5 of those. And I think everybody up here is too. But we need to do this, in 2 bites. And so we need to decide what's in the first bite and what's in the second bite. And but I'm very excited that we're here. Very excited.
Has the design process started for some of this, Mr. Lee?
No, the full county, it had to go through budget, and then it had to go to full county. It's there, I believe.
Okay.
Anyway, we also had a couple of weeks back in the consent agenda, there was 2 architects brought before y'all for professional services. We've had the same architect since I've been here.
Joseph Binkley, yeah.
And they're good guys.
They are.
And there was some discussion about bringing in a second firm. Per state law, you cannot ask for their fees till after you've selected who they are. You get their price after you've made a selection. So with 2 firms, purchasing reached out to them last week once we got the approval, and we should have those back, and at our next board meeting, we'll present those fees for those 2 different firms, and then we'll make a recommendation on which firm gets which project. The current firm that we've been using, Binkley Garcia, has already looked at a couple of these projects and done some preliminary work. If those are in your top tier, because Binkley is one of the 2 firms that has been selected, we would probably recommend that they stay involved with those projects because they've already started. I think that's kind of, they did it on a hourly basis because they knew we were in this transition. Thought was very admirable on their part. Then if it's one of the other projects that they hadn't got that far in, then we may try one of the others. But I want you to see their fees in comparison, because it's not the total package, but it does, I think it comes into play.
So you're saying that Binkley Garcia could do part of this, and the other firm we're looking at could do
Something else. Yes.
how we decide? Okay.
That's correct.
Okay. And the principals will be consulted and all the
Already
kinds of
started on a
things that
couple of the
you, yeah, I
projects.
figured you had.
We've had a number of sit-downs on a couple of the projects, but they're not.
That's okay.
Had to get to something that I felt comfortable showing you guys that you said, yes, we could do it.
Sure.
So there'll be some more conversations backward.
Okay. Looking forward to them.
I appreciate the information that you've provided and the consistent work on this building plan. Members of the board, I'd ask you to revisit the information that we've already looked at. We know what our plan was or what we presented to the commission. We do have to have a tough conversation about what does that 2-year look like. And I would ask us to remember Stewart's Creek Elementary, as that was of great concern previously. So if you have questions, I'd ask you to reach out to Mr. Lee between now and the board meeting. And if you would like to have a special call to relook at this, or if we can discuss this at the next meeting, this coming up meeting Thursday, I think that would be a good time for us to do that. But let's prepare to have a conversation about how we'd like to move forward so we have something to take to the commission. Mr. Young?
The concern I have is Blackman High School, what the current capacity is, and then what this addition will take it to. I'm getting real concerned about these high schools getting over 2,500 students in the high school. Really, it's a large number at 2,000, but you start getting over 2,500, I think it's going to get unmanageable for a lot of our administrators. So I'm real curious what this addition would do to Blackman if we add it the way it's planned in the budget.
What would the capacity be, Mr. Young? Or Mr. Lee, excuse me?
We've used that 2,500 number, so we've kind of used their core capacity, what we show, and then we're backing into if their core capacity, in each school's core capacity right now is slightly different. So when we say we would, one school may have a core capacity of 1,900 and another one's got 2,100, we would try and add more at the one that's 1,900 and less at the other.
Okay.
So we're trying to keep that 2,500 number is our moving target for each of these campuses based on what we're saying their core capacity is. So we are taking that into effect.
Good.
Now, that doesn't mean that someday we couldn't put 2585 or something like that.
One of the things I'd like to see, I think even at 2,500, that 4 APs is not enough for high school. I think one more.
Yeah, we'll need some more admin.
Absolutely,
Yes.
Mr. Spurlock, absolutely.
Ms. Boder, you agree with that?
Mr. Bowder says, whatever
Wait,
the
for
board
safety, I
wants.
agree with the safety and the volume.
I mean, I don't know how, I understand what the county commissioners are asking us, but I don't know, I mean, it's like asking us to pick 2 of our favorite grandchildren. Every one of these, we all agree that every one of these locations need the annex. We don't have any property to build anywhere else to an additional school. And, I mean, how are we going to really look at this? Is that capacity? I mean, look at Laverne High School, the capacity that they're at. And we've got those 9,000 more homes coming in up on the north end. So, I don't know how we choose that.
I realize that it's a very difficult decision, but I would just ask you to keep in mind, if we don't choose, they will. And if this board wants to surrender that outcome to the commission, we can do that. But it is a tough decision, and you make a very valid point. But I think we need to be prepared to negotiate as they appear to be on board. And I mean, we could tell them this is absolutely what we want, but if we can't get this, at a minimum, we can accept this. And I think that maybe needs to be the way we frame our conversation with them. But I do agree with you 100%.
We're at capacity almost everywhere. Every location needs something. And I don't know, maybe we need to look at Stewart's Creek Elementary, moving some students to Brown's Chapel if there's capacity there.
And that's a conversation I think we need to be having. And maybe that's, again, let's think about some questions that we can continue this conversation on Thursday. I would encourage you to reach out to members, Mr. Spurlock and members of the staff to get the appropriate information so we can move towards a decision on Thursday.
You do it.
Fair? Perfect. Thank you. Any other comments, questions on 5-year plan? Okay, next item, Mr. Spurlock.
All right, number 3 is the Rocky Fork Middle Baseball School Board electrical request. Principal Jennifer Clark has requested to install electrical service to the location for a future school board. Engineering and Construction has reviewed the request and approves. This request is at no cost to the board.
Thank you. Any questions, comments? Okay. Next item, Mr. Spurlock.
All right, number 4, Stewart's Creek Middle Wildflower Garden apiary project. Principal, that's easy to say now. Principal Tony Murray has requested to install a wildflower garden. This STEM project is to be funded by the TSIN TVA. Engineering Instruction has requested and approves.
And awesome. Yeah.
That's bees, but we said that there wouldn't be any problem with them stinging anyone or anything like that, right?
That'll be up to Dr. Murray.
Local maintenance. Any questions, comments?
Bee magnet.
Look forward to seeing them. Next item.
All right, CTE and Oakland High School Storage Building. Principal John Marshall and CTE are requesting to construct a 24 by 36 foot metal sided storage building. Engineering Construction has reviewed the request and approves. The building will be funded from CTE funds and kept below $25,000.
Okay. Questions?
What will be going in here? You
They'll
know,
be storing various things. It's not heated or cooled. It's like
Okay.
a barn. It's just going to be a permanent barn, and it's out back between the gym and the
Okay.
shop classes. They're repurposing some of those buildings for welding and some other CTE classes, and they're filling them up, so they're going to be using this to store some of the materials.
okay, thank you.
Okay. Very good. Next item.
All right, number 6, emergency Smyrna PD Center roof requests. During the recent storms, portions of the roof of Smyrna PD Center were lifted and sat back down. Temporary repairs have been made to protect the building. A roof replacement is required at this time. We're requesting to utilize existing funds in the 177 fund left from the Thurman Francis project. Mr. Beaudry agrees with this request and will provide a budget amendment when the time is appropriate.
I went ahead and just, when I spoke to Ms. Allen, Rhonda Allen with Health Net, and she said that would be fine since this was an emergency repair, and we were already moving the turf project forward on Thursday night to the budget committee. I asked her if we could go ahead and just do the budget amendment for this emergency repair as well. And so if you folks would approve those 2 budget amendments on the front end of your board meeting on Thursday with those 2 motions, and that way it'll be ready at 5:30 for the budget committee, so I know to them it's already been approved by the BOE.
Sure. Move them up. If members of the board don't mind, we can move them up. Absolutely. It's that $57,541? Okay. And we've only done repairs, so when are we expecting to replace? What's the time frame for that?
Time frame? Weather permitting, it'll probably take 3 to 4 weeks at the tops.
Perfect. Thank you. Any questions, members of the board? Okay, next item, Mr.
All right, insurance update.
The BOE Insurance Committee at the board, last time you met, there was a request from the board to go ahead and have the insurance study committee meet one last time to review over the items that were still outstanding before the BOE could take a vote on whether to go to the state plans or not. Since then, we put out some good information, some pretty robust information to our employees to help them, so when they make a vote on this, because of course by state statute, the employees have to vote, 50% plus one, to go to the state plans. The good news is I think we all are seeing that there's a lot of opportunity, a lot of benefit to our employees under the state plans. The good news about a vote is, should our employees decide that's the direction they would like to go, to put that before the BOE for the final vote, let's say down the road, years from now, another board would want to take them off those plans, they would have to vote again before that future board could take them off those plans. So it gives them some protection. That's why the state put that in there. The items that were hanging out there was, and we reviewed that with the insurance committee last night, was the future of what the clinics, the wellness clinics will look like. Also the post-65 continued retirement, coverage. And of course, that's been discussed, and there's still some items that are still having to be answered. Ms. Bratton is working with Cigna on that, make sure the retirees are taken care of. The other item would be the tier. Right now there's 7 tiers depending on when you were hired with RCS and your service time and your age, of what you would get for retiree health coverage when you retired. That, of course, will be cleaned up and changed a little bit if we went to the state plan. However, it's always been stressed through this entire time that no one was going to lose benefits. There was going to be gaining. And I think the BOE will be happy with, and our employees and retirees will be okay with it. One of the options is, of course, the Medicare Advantage plan that the county is looking at, not the BOE, but the county was looking at. It would actually add post-65 drug coverage to well over 1,000 of our employees and retirees that currently do not get post-65 drug coverage. So there is something that could not only be a great benefit that some of our people don't have, it'd be a great recruitment and retention tool for our employees or teachers. So going forward, of course, the timeline, we hope to have the employees be able to take a vote, and this be before the board April 7th for your consideration. And if that happens, then of course I'll have the timeline going forward from there for the BOE to see. Is that, Ms. Bratton, did that sum it up pretty well?
Perfect. You did a great job.
Thank you. Any questions? Look forward to hearing more. Number 18, Director's Update.
I'll have something on Thursday.
Okay. Ms. Maxwell, Tennessee Legislative Network. Same with Federal. Wonderful, thank you. Number 21, General Discussion. Any general discussion this evening? Want to save it for Thursday? Mr. Young?
Please.
Someone,
Go ahead.
I was contacted by someone out in the John Coleman Annex. It's that heat and cooling issue that we have. It's an old system where we either have the heat or we have cooling. So last few days have been warm, and they want some cooling. We need to see where we are on that project. I know we were looking at switching that system over. It was on our list to do, but somehow it's gotten bumped back. So, what is our status on?
We'll take it like we do. We're getting ready for next year, and we'll be glad to look at it like we look at everything and see where we go. I think it's probably one of the ones we will ask for next year. The price tag on it's a little less than some. That's not necessarily what our criteria is. As they get higher in that pecking order and we look at our funds and how we have to distribute them, it'll be high on the list.
If I could jump in there, Mr. Young, I think one of the things probably that's kind of shifted that a little bit is we added the pre-K there. We've got over 200, do we not? And then I think that probably needs to go on up the priority list. I mean, I don't have a vote, but I think that, and you probably, you don't keep up with that kind of stuff.
Okay. Any other comments? Questions? Anything else for general discussion? Seeing nothing else, I want to thank John for helping us tonight with our media issues, and for our sheriffs for being here tonight. We appreciate you. We are adjourned.
Thank you.